So, hello and welcome to our latest Meet the Scholar event. My name's Drew Yeager. I'm one of the co-founders at Club Soda. I'm just going to do, by way of a short introduction to what we're doing here, and then I'm going to hand over to Claire and Sally, who are going to take us through the next 45 minutes to an hour or so. If you are watching us on Facebook or on YouTube, if you've got any questions or comments, please do put them in the comments box. Claire will weave them into the conversation with Sally as we're going along. Club Soda exists to help people drink more mindfully and live well. And one of the things which is really important to us is that everything that we do is rooted in the emerging science around behaviour change and how it is that people change their drinking and change their relationship with alcohol. And Sally's research, which looks at the impact of communities in doing that, is really important to us. We have a big community on Facebook and elsewhere, and we know from our own research and anecdotal evidence that being in relationship with other people makes a really big difference when you're changing your drinking. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Claire, and thanks so much for being here.
Great, thanks, Drew. So yeah, welcome to the third in the series of Meet the Scholar. We are joined, or lucky to be joined, by Sally Sanger. So thank you, Sally, for coming up. Just a quick introduction to myself. I'm Claire Davey. I'm a PhD researcher at Canterbury Christ Church University, researching women's experiences of sobriety in online sobriety communities. And I'll be facilitating the discussion today. But Sally's here presenting her the title of her talk will be Alcohol Online Support Groups, their impacts on user beliefs about problem drinking. But it comes from her PhD thesis, which was recently submitted at the University of Sheffield. So hopefully next time we talk to you, Sally, we can call you Dr. Sally Sanger, but yeah, fingers crossed. So let's see how that goes. Obviously positive. But yeah, so Sally's sort of main focus has been on non-12-step alcohol online support groups, and has a particular interest in positive sobriety movement and older people's drinking. So prior to the PhD, Sally completed an MSc at UCL, and I guess that's in keeping with her 20-year-long career in industry, which was with the NHS and Macmillan, very much focused on sort of patient data management. So a great sort of wealth of experience there. I'm not going to take up too much more time before Sally sort of shares her research with us, only to say, a thank you from me. You've been very, giving in your time from my perspective, because our research sort of overlaps, and I'm looking forward to you being able to share it with a broader audience today. So I'll sort of field the questions at the end. People who are putting in questions, hang in there, we will sort of deal with them. But first of all, we're going to let Sally take the time to deliver her presentation. So over to you, Sally.
Thank you. Right, I'll share my screen. No, bear with me.
That's right.
Right, we might have to just go with that, I think, mightn't we? Yeah.
Great.
Okay, so let's go back a bit. Right, so, well, thanks very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for having me here. I'm really interested in Club Soda, so it's useful to chat with people about it. So I'm going to talk about my research into the different ways the discussion forums of online support groups impact on their users' beliefs. And I'm doing this in relation, as Claire said, to non-12-step groups, so ones that aren't promoting the 12 steps of AA for recovery. There's been a lot of research onto AA, so I wanted to look at something different and other options out there for people. So the talk's going to cover a bit about me and how I got to this topic, why it matters, why we need to look at impacts on beliefs. I'll briefly describe the methods used and then discuss the findings. And I'm going to use the term AOSG a lot because alcohol online support groups is quite a mouthful and time is only limited. So if I say AOSG, that's what it means, alcohol online support group. So a bit about me. Claire mentioned some of this. I started off actually in humanities research, looking at women in Chaucer, then went on to work in the NHS on information for patients and the public. So I was supporting organisations and practitioners to improve their information provision to people. I then went to Macmillan Cancer Support as an information advisor, and then back to the NHS to work on cancer information there. But I really missed academic learning, and so I decided to do a part-time MSc in health informatics at UCL, and that led on to the PhD at Sheffield. So as Claire said, that's now finished, and I'm waiting for the Viva oral exam, which is going to be on the 7th of June. So exciting times, as it says in that advert. What sparked the research then? Well, my interest in online support groups and peer support generally started really when I was widowed at a relatively young age of 43. While my existing friends were lovely, none of them really understood what it was like or knew what to say. So I went online and found a website for young widows, joined it and found it incredibly useful. And I made a contact there who had been bereaved of her husband on the same day by the same illness, and she was the same age as me. So we chatted and we just got where each other were coming from, and it was a huge help. I didn't feel so alone anymore. So as members of a support group, you guys know what I'm talking about. This was a very powerful experience, and ever since then I've been a passionate advocate for online support groups. Yes, I know there can be problems like trolling and lack of visual feedback online, but these can be managed, especially with a good moderator. It's important to note that offline groups also have their own problems, and we don't tend to sort of hear so much about that. Rather than throw the baby out with the bathwater, we need to support people to know the full range of groups available to them. And we need to help people understand the benefits of the groups, like easy access, availability 24/7, diversity of views, from connecting with people all over the world. And we need to let them know about the downsides and how to manage and deal with these. So for me, it's very much about equipping the patients and the public to stay safe online so that they can benefit from the strengths of online support groups. Even where people prefer face-to-face groups, and let's face it, you can't hug online, online groups can be a great supplement out of hours, or of course a backup when things like lockdown happens and you can't get out to meetings. So at the same time, I was really interested in problematic drinking and had some knowledge of it from long and close associations with AA people. While I respect AA very much, it's not for everyone, and I wanted to explore the much less visible alternatives and see if I could help contribute to increasing user choice in some way. The diversity of beliefs about problem drinking fascinates me, so I married up the two interests to look at the impact of the groups, the AOSGs, on beliefs. So who cares? Why does it matter? Why should you be here at all? And I'm very glad you are. Patient and public beliefs about any illness or problem are extremely important on impacting what's actually done about it, what they do. So that in turn then is going to impact upon its social health and other outcomes. So if we care about people's health and social outcomes, then we need to care about their beliefs. It's common sense that if a person doesn't see something as a problem, they probably won't do anything about it. And if they do see it as a problem, their interpretation of it will affect what treatment or management they think would be appropriate. So if you believe that problem drinking is a spiritual disease, then a practitioner promoting a medication-based method, like the Sinclair method, might not make any sense and therefore be ignored or not complied with, which you may think is a good or not a good reason, but a good thing. But, you know, the fact is it's about choice. With drinking, there are lots and lots of explanations, so it's not a matter of universal consensus. It's helpful, therefore, to understand where these beliefs come from and how they're developed, created, or otherwise affected. The research matters also because it's looking at non-12-step groups. And as I said, AA really dominates research, I think, on support groups in alcohol. But even when you're looking at the non-12-step groups, research tends to focus around about 6 different groups. So moderation management, SOS, Life Ring, Women for Sobriety. Of late, Soberistas has had some good attention, and especially above all, of course, smart recovery. That's fine, but there are many other sources as well, including your own. And I hope my research now and in the future might help to highlight that and broaden out choice. So what did I do? I promise I'll keep this bit brief. Firstly, I did a thematic analysis of discussion forum postings from 3 non-12-step ASGs with different views around problem drinking. I approached groups from a list of groups I drew up to meet certain criteria. So they were in English, they were publicly available, didn't look at closed groups, and they were directed at people with problem drinking. I got consent from the moderators and administrators and downloaded and analysed 1,500 posts from relevant threads, looking at what was said or could be seen about problem drinking beliefs and the impact of the groups on them. After that was done, I reapproached the moderators of the groups and other groups for consent to recruit people for interviews. 5 groups agreed, including 2 of the original ones. So I was able to get 22 in-depth interviews, and I'm going to draw mainly on the interviews today. The next slide shows you a brief description, brief information about these groups. So I named them A to F, and you can see that they varied in size, that is in terms of numbers of members, varied in terms of location, so some were in the UK, some were in North America, and one was in continental Europe. And they all were different in their approach to recovery. So for example, A felt that cognitive behavioural therapy was the way forward, and C felt that the medication-based treatment was the way forward. D and E had their own harm reduction programs, so they were quite specific and they were different. They were specific to those groups. Most of the groups were moderated, one wasn't, which led to some interesting observations. And the final column gives what the group was used for, so whether it was used in the forum analysis postings, both the interviews or both of those. So what did I find out? Well, the impact of groups goes beyond just attracting like-minded people. They actively influence people's beliefs about problem drinking and its treatment. There are 3 main themes. First of these was impacts on specific aspects of ideas. The second is, I call it someone like me. I'm going to come back to all these 3, of course. And the third was no requirements of belief. Additionally, I looked at the information behaviours used online. And information behaviour is any kind of action around information, like identifying that you need some, looking for it, hiding from it, sharing it with others, evaluating or using it. So to take the first one first, theme 1 first, impacts on specific ideas. This changes to quite specific ideas about drinking and recovery, great or small. So I'll go through the different types and give some examples. As you would might expect, people acquired ideas from the forums. So for example, Anna of Group A, Bethany Group D, Jackie Group E, and Isabel, Tina and Yvonne from Group F all mentioned getting specific tips for dealing with difficult specific situations, things like going to weddings and where you'd be expected to drink, or having a reunion with drinking friends from the past. Ben of Group C mentioned acquiring the concept of mindful drinking from his forum, and Alan of Group D learned how to safely taper off alcohol. Ideas were also changed, for example, what to expect following a particular treatment in reality, as opposed to theory. And the cumulative and longitudinal aspects of forums were important in changing ideas, as they presented users with the opportunity to observe people, a lot of people, over a long period of time. For example, in terms of moderate drinking, both Bethany and Alan of Group D and Jackie of Group E saw multiple examples of others trying and failing to drink moderately, and because of this, they changed their ideas on its feasibility for most people. So Jackie said, I see it again and again and again on the site. I see so many people saying that they thought they had it under control, and they went away, and then they're back and they realised they're not in control. Elsewhere, others found the opposite and realised that they could become moderate drinkers because they could see people like them doing it. Confirming ideas. So, for example, in Group A, the poster mostly talking, as I said, about interviewees, but I'm also quoting from some of the posters. So this was in the posts analysed, and Ozzy said to Jen, that is something that I've often thought, but maybe drinking is about avoidance of self. So she's confirmed to him what he always thought. And in group B, John said to Fred, I agree with what you're saying. Heavy abuse of alcohol leads to people getting kindling, like you said. Sometimes this went further and manifested in reinforcing ideas. So that's where ideas are strengthened and supported by the forums. So Joe felt that Group E reinforced his belief about the difference between types of problematic drinking. It further cemented the existence of problem drinking as a separate situation from alcoholism. And finally, challenging. This was an important function to many of them because they often thought that to do otherwise was not helpful. So the poster Kim of Group A said, it isn't okay just to say there when people aren't doing well. Nice words are not always useful if they're just accepting of what's happened. And an example of challenging would be from Bethany in Group D. What is actually your plan when you break it down? It's all very well saying you're going to have an abstinence day on Monday, but what are you going to do instead? So what do we make of this? Well, forums are places where people exchange and discuss information and ideas, so we would expect these kinds of interactions and effects. The examples given are ones where we can definitely attribute something to the group's forums, but I saw no examples at all of anyone who had learnt their whole belief set from a group. There are so many other sources, TV, movies, families, friends, etc., that impact people throughout their life. Alcohol saturates modern Western culture, and your group and other sober curious bodies are doing great work in highlighting how taken for granted it is that the normal person, so-called, drinks. All of those sources potentially had an effect too, and isolating where specific thoughts come from is hard, although it was made easier by the fact that using a group is a deliberate experience, not an unconscious influence. Excuse me a moment. Where I think peer support groups on and offline have a very powerful, more holistic impact on beliefs is in showing peer users people like themselves, what I call someone like me, often for the first time. So many of the interviewees arrived at their groups with a stereotypical, with these particular groups, with a stereotypical image of the alcoholic as someone under the control of alcohol, whose life was chaotic and who had lost everything. They were tuned into the binary view of problem drinking. You're either alcoholic or everything else, which is normal. They had quite clear views on what these two stereotypes were and that they didn't belong in either. So, for example, Anna said, I suppose I would have seen an alcoholic, as she calls it, as somebody whose life was really getting out of control in whatever way, whether that be that they weren't performing well at work or, you know, they were having difficulties in relationships, those kinds of things. And none of them applied to me. But equally, she knew that it wasn't actually normal to drink a bottle and a half of wine every night, 7 days a week. That was not normal behaviour. So the forums were the place where people like Anna saw multiple others like themselves who fell into neither of these stereotypes. And this account of how it affected them was typical of many interviewees, and so I'll read it in full. There was an article in the Sunday Times about the founder of a group, and I just thought, that is my story. And it didn't feel, she wasn't ashamed, you know, she was just a normal woman. I mean, that was it, you feel so abnormal. She just looked like a normal person with a job and children, and you know, and I just thought, that's for me. And then when she went into the site, she said, just every story I identified with, they were all just, you know, for me, people with drink problems had lost everything. And here were just women who were managing to be a mother and managing to go to work every day, and yet were just drinking too much every night. And I mean, I didn't identify with all the stories. I still managed to separate going, okay, so you were a real alcoholic. But, you know, there were a few who seemed to be a lot worse, but most of the people were just like me, really. So the site gave her an alternative, a picture of problem drinkers that were apparently coping with life and functioning successfully, but were still suffering harm. It effectively provided space to incorporate the idea of problematic drinking into the life of a functioning person without any feelings of shame, and it showed Cara a category that she could identify with. And shortly afterwards, she described she described the relief of finding people like herself as a weight lifted from her shoulders. And I think that's also conveyed in the repetition of just in that quote that's on screen at the moment. Just every story I identified. They were all just, and people who drink, just drinking too much every night. It's kind of minimising, reducing the problem and making it more manageable, I think, by saying just this often. I then went on to ask her what she meant by a real alcoholic, whatever that is, and she replied in a way that shows she'd really interpreted and expanded what that meant now. She said, now I think a real alcoholic is someone like me. Several other users, particularly in groups E and F, identified finding others like them as a key impact the forum had on their beliefs about problem drinking. It moved them from believing they were unique in a negative way, a lonely way, and not a nice way, not fitting into any category, to seeing it as not abnormal or uncommon to have issues with drink. The implications of this change were that their views of themselves as drinker changed radically, lifting any shame and stigma so that they could recognise, acknowledge, accept and deal with their issues. I should say probably self-stigma there, yeah. It also changed their ideas about the nature of problem drinking, opening it up to a more nuanced range of meaning. So it expanded, for example, views of the possible consequences. One didn't have to lose everything. And also the symptoms or signs. One didn't have to drink all day or experience physical withdrawals. Basically, in a nutshell, it introduced them to the spectrum view of problem drinking rather than the binary alcoholic, everything else not alcoholic dichotomy. The framing of problem drinking is incredibly important, and I think the forums can play a significant role in relation to this in terms of expanding and developing people's ideas about what it is to be a problem drinker. Users spoke of finding someone like me as being important in other ways. So Bethany mentioned several times that finding others like herself helped her to understand herself by showing her patterns of behaviour that she then identified she had. Kathy talked about the reinforcing effects of talking to others with the same views on treatment, and Ben mentioned liking the fact of being with others undertaking the same treatment. So it's just a nice experience to be with others doing what you're doing. So he said, it's just nice to be able to relate to some of those people who want to do the same things you are. Overall, only 4 interviewees, Anna of A, Julie of C, Alan of D and Jackie of E, did not talk about finding people like themselves being important to them. As a result of finding others like themselves, several came to question alcohol's role in society. So as Teresa said, we start to get a feeling that we're not alone, but in the bigger sense, is the fact that we can become a voice for the fact that our culture has become too alcohol-centred. She went on to describe how she applied to take part in a race as a runner, was accepted, paid her fee, but found that the marketing in practice was all about alcohol and how great the beer was going to be at the end of it, of the race. So she wrote to them and she said, I want my money back. You're promoting alcohol. Running isn't about alcohol, it's about being healthy. And I really took a stand. I would not have done that without Group F behind me because I learnt so much from them. And so it gives us a collective voice and we're not afraid to speak up in a bigger way about it. We're going to change the world. We're not going to make alcohol normal anymore. And that, you wouldn't get that without a group. I think that's quite a powerful quote, really. And I think this is where the groups are so powerful that they show people living through their experience of not drinking or recovering, whatever you want to call it, not just telling them about it, but you can see their lives as they go on. And I think that, again, it comes back to that longitudinal and cumulative effects. Okay, so the third theme was no requirements of belief. A distinguishing feature of all the groups I studied was the freedom afforded individuals to develop their own beliefs, Users weren't required to follow an existing comprehensive belief system. Even where the site's information pages endorsed a particular treatment or explanation of problem drinking, there was no compulsion to adopt this. And many of them saw this as very different to AA, setting the groups apart. So Ariana said, I used to go to AA and I liked in AA the support, but what I didn't like was the insistence that certain beliefs must be had and that was the only way to succeed. So what I truly like about Group F is that it offers that same support, but without any particular requirements of belief. Instead, there was an emphasis on tolerance, respecting others' ideas, and developing one's own way of recovery. As a result, each of the 22 interviewees had a slightly differing interpretation of problem drinking. So I used a model from psychology to look at several dimensions of each interviewee's beliefs about this, specifically what they thought caused it, its consequences, its controllability, identity meaning what they called it and what they saw as signs of it. The timeline, did they see it as a chronic problem or an acute one going that would be resolved, dealt with, put in the past, and how it should be dealt with. What I found, yes, basically, was that, as I said, each person had married together what resonated with them to form a unique viewpoint overall. And this marrying together, or berry picking, as I call it, was a distinctive form of information behaviour that I will talk more about in the next sections. Whilst there were no requirements of belief, however, the general high level of the approach of the group was important in attracting and maintaining usage. So it mattered to many of the interviewees that their group wasn't AA, that it wasn't 12-step, to some just that it did see moderate drinking as a viable goal, and to others that it was just open to people having their own ideas. Attraction to the general approach at that kind of high level was the most important reason for choosing a particular group, according to 15 out of 22 of them. It should be said that that became less important as time went on, with social dynamics being the factor that kept 17 out of 22 of them with their group. So this throws new light onto a kind of vexed question that's been ongoing for years about whether one should match users to groups that share the same beliefs about problem drinking. It did seem to be important in terms of the overall approach of the group, but not the detailed programme of how to get sober and the specific explanations of problem drinking. So my research challenges Ance's statement that each self-help group claims a certain wisdom concerning the problem it treats. Each has a specialised system of teachings that members venerate as a secret of recovery. And more recently, Chambers as well, writing about non-12-step groups, took a similar view that members are required to adopt their group's beliefs. My research, in contrast, suggests that a large part of the point of these groups was in fact that they did not require members to venerate their teachings and allowed them the freedom to judge for themselves. So this set the non-12-step groups apart from AA in the eyes of the interviewees and many of the posters. Beliefs were often seen as fluid and changing over time, so you don't have to adopt a particular belief and you don't have to stay with that particular belief forever. So, for example, are they brand new ideas, Megan said? No, I don't think they are. I think they've taken a long time to get to where they are. And I'm sure they're not going to stagnate at what they are now. They'll continue to evolve. Is it all down to Group F? No, but there will definitely have been influences there, definitely. I asked interviewees about their information journeys with the group, and the following was typical. So in terms of finding the group, the commonest way people found them was through a vague search on Google. So putting in something like alcohol help or help with alcohol. They weren't necessarily looking for a group or even thinking in terms of peer support. Others found the group when they were engaged in completely different activity. For example, someone at the gym was flicking through a magazine to while away the time and bumped into, as she described it, something about the group. So the lack of referrals or specific searches for groups, only one person was referred, suggests that there may be a lot of luck involved still in getting people to groups, and there's still a need to raise their profiles so people know they're an option to look into. I talked a bit about why they chose a group and why they stayed with it. Other reasons for this included group functionality, group size, information range and quality, and the group's values and norms. Once in the forums, usage patterns tended to change over time, moving from more general queries to more specific ones, and moving from asking questions to answering them. There was a lot of use of the information pages at the start. And again, usage was a pretty fluid thing in terms of people moving between functions in the groups. So from blogs to chat room to forum to information pages, especially at the start. And also on and off the site to check out recommendations and references for other information sources, such as books and websites. 9 out of 22 people started as lurkers, but all but one ended up posting on the site. And I'll come back to searching, sharing, and other activities. Most were still with their group, but the commonest reason for having left a group in the past was dislike of its beliefs. So Bethany of D, Kathy of C, Christine of E, and Ariana, Grace, and Robert of F had all done this. And in several cases, it was AA that they'd left. Again, fluidity was a characteristic of leaving, as people came and went in their groups on forums. So there was no need to stay forever, and sometimes people took breaks. So they came in, used it, left, and then maybe came back later on, leaving perhaps because they were busy offline or because of relapse. Right, in terms of searching for information, looking for information, the most distinctive behaviour was the one I mentioned before, which is berry picking. This term was coined by Marcia Bates and signifies looking for information as you pick berries in a forest. So choosing the best from different bushes as you wander around the pathways. Here it means people use the forums and the many other sources they came across to pick out what resonated with them. And that word came up a lot. Resonate was, it came up a lot. And then they would pick what resonated and put those elements together into their own mix. So they picked from different berry bushes, if you like, and put it all together and made their own smoothie, their own unique smoothie. Users didn't generally adopt beliefs because they were scientifically authoritative or because of what the site thought, but they relied on their own judgments of what felt right and made sense in terms of their life and experience. And beliefs and information behaviours are intertwined here. So as there were no requirements of belief, berry picking was acceptable information. It's okay to pick and choose. And it's appropriate, even encouraged. For example, in group A, older, more established members, rather, would encourage newcomers to read lots of different threads and read around, find where you're comfy, they'd say. But that behaviour of berry picking in its turn leads to the unique sets of beliefs. So it's kind of one influences the other. I think it's possible that berry picking might prove a useful theory for understanding information behaviours in other online support groups, particularly where there are multiple or contested explanations of a problem. Right, information sharing. In the forums, people shared many different types of information with each other in different ways. So the types of information included facts, references, advice, opinions, and experiential information. And different ways of sharing included stories and anecdotes, role modelling, mantras and sayings, and disagreements. Those are examples. I'm not going through absolutely everything. There were some notable differences between the ways these were used in the discussion forums of the non-12-step ASGs and the face-to-face meetings of AA groups, which was where the interviewees got their view of AA from. There were different approaches to disagreeing, commenting, or feeding back directly on another member's share and on providing advice. So those activities were acceptable and commonplace in non-12-step groups, but not in face-to-face AA meetings. Crosstalk, or directly challenging or refuting another participant, is strongly discouraged in AA, but was accepted in the non-12-step online forums. AA's distinctive method of conveying disagreement and/or advice is to use story and advice disguised as self-disclosure, as Lewis put it. So if someone disagreed in AA, they might give an anecdote from their own life and give a different interpretation from what the original person has. But they don't direct it straight at that other person, rather they apply the moral to themselves. It may be that this difference doesn't actually extend to AA's own online discussion forum, which is EAA, or to its online meetings. And that's something I'd be interested to look into to see whether that's the case. There were also different approaches to scientific research, intellectual discussion, and providing references. AA was seen by the interviewees and posters as opposed to these, and promoting acceptance and belief rather than independent analysis, thought, and judgment. Role modelling found in the non-12-step groups is officially discouraged in AA, as all members are equal. AA does encourage sponsors, but there's a difference. A role model is someone that one would want to emulate, whereas an AA sponsor is someone that guides a person through working the programme, whose advice should be followed. Both AA meetings and non-12-step groups use mantras, but these are often personalised in non-12-step groups to the individual poster. So it's something that they feel is inspiring or meaningful to them personally. Whereas in AA, they tend to be the crystallised wisdom of the groups, common to all the members, like first things first and one day at a time, etc. The forums were also used for other information-related activities. There were kind of platforms for this. Other than searching or sharing. So, for example, there are places where people could go to celebrate sobriety achievements, great and small. Places where they could become more politically active around drinking, as I noted earlier. Many use them as places to develop and get feedback on plans, rehearsing what they might say in a difficult situation. And others used the forums as a memory aid so that they could look back on their journey and learn from it or celebrate how far they'd come. So to sum up, we looked at 3 key ways in which the forums impact their users' beliefs. Firstly, by changing specific ideas. Secondly, by causing a holistic reappraisal of themselves as drinker and their overall view of problem drinking as a result of seeing someone like me. And thirdly, by providing a setting where people could develop their own ideas and beliefs with no requirement to conform. We saw that this was typically done through berry picking, which was a distinctive feature of the groups. And I then talked about differences from AA in terms of information sharing and described a few of the other information-related activities users carried out in the forums. So finally, next steps. I'm very interested indeed in the Sober Curious movement, and I want to do research in that area. In particular, I'm intrigued why it has this image in the press of being all about millennials, when I can't see anything in the philosophy yet that would exclude older people. And I also saw in Club Soda's 2020 research on drinking habits during lockdown, its survey of its members, that the largest number of respondents were in the 50+ age group. So this could suggest that this media image is skewed. I want to look at whether or not women in the age 50 to 70 group are in fact actually using Sober Curious facilities on or offline, and which ones they're using. If they aren't using them, then I'd like to explore why and whether this movement can be helpful to them or whether they're already going elsewhere. So at the moment, I'm pulling a proposal together and planning to apply for funding over the next year. I really want to involve users in this research from the outset. So if anyone here might be interested in hearing more or getting involved, please do contact me. And my email is ssanger1@sheffield.ac.uk. I'd also welcome any thoughts you have about older women and sober curiosity. I don't want to reinvent the wheel or take the research in the wrong direction. So please, all thoughts are welcome. Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
I think your future plans in terms of research is so important. Just around the issues of visibility for older people, particularly women over 50s. There's just not enough visibility of those women in any sort of research or category or advertising sort of segment that we're looking at. So that's really important. Just a brief note to say thank you, obviously, for sharing your research, but also for sharing a bit of your story at the beginning as well. It's good for people to understand that context.
I think it's important that people know that I understand the impact it can have from personal experience. I haven't just read about it in a book. it really made a difference. So that's why I popped that in. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Like understanding the context and how those things work. As researchers, sometimes, you know, when you talk to somebody about what you're researching, if they're not involved in the groups, they kind of look at you like, you mean you can do this online? And so there's a lot of sort of misunderstanding as to what can be done or what is going on sort of online. Obviously, if people have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I know that Astra's already written in just to say that, you know, she's a woman of 51 and wanting connection with real people, and she just sort of stumbled across this and was, you know, enjoying it. So thank you very much. And Sophie also was engaging and had to head off. But I have a few questions to kick off, and then we'll see what comes in. So I thought, first of all, in terms of, you mentioned referral a couple of times, and that's interesting to me because my understanding of online sober communities is more that they're kind of voluntary, people, you know, sign up to be part of them. And so what did you mean by referral? Is it public health engagement, that sort of thing?
Right. That referral, which was one example, basically came about because somebody had gone into emergency care in the NHS because of their drinking, and the alcohol nurse suggested to them that they contact this group that, you know, explained about it and said this is a nice group. So because of that, they did. But yeah, in terms of a sort of formal referral, I mean, yeah, yes. I think that I personally have a bit of a hobby horse that health professionals don't often enough say this is an option for you. And it's that really, I think, that I would like to see a lot more of, a lot less fear of online support groups and a lot more value for what they can provide in the sense of how powerful they are. And that, yeah, that's what I'd like to see, really. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I'm just going to touch on that. I've just heard there's building work going on outside, so sorry if that noise is being picked up.
Well, I heard my cat was banging on the window just now, so apologies if you heard that.
It's like, let me in. Yeah, I mean, in terms of referral, you're right. You know, that woman was probably quite lucky that that healthcare professional had a sort of understanding of what's available for different needs. I think that there is a bit of a problem in the sense that in training, medical training, a lot of doctors are sort of sent to AA groups as a model of this is what, you know, your patient should look to if there's a, you know, they have a problem with drinking, rather than sort of more of an holistic approach. I also was reading some research, and you're probably familiar with this, but over lockdown, you know, it was found that although higher risk drinkers were drinking more, they were also more likely to try and address their drinking patterns. But access to evidence-based, well, you know, in inverted commas, support had actually dropped off. So who was picking up the excess in that time, or, you know, and who was engaging with people to help them create this behavior change around alcohol? And, you know, I know probably Club Soda can speak more to that in terms of sort of numbers and whatever, but I think it goes to show that whilst the research is so focused on the rates of evidence-based solutions, there's this whole sort of third sector over here which is really working and contributing a lot, and it's not the focus of as much research.
No, it's definitely not. That's true. And of course, in terms of AA's dominance, fair amount of recovery programs in treatment will be based on 12 steps, or will kind of mandate people to go to AA as part of that or encourage them to do so. I think there's also a tendency now to sort of have the alternative of smart recovery, and that smart recovery is okay and fine. Well, I'm sure it is. I don't know it, but, you know, it's probably really, really great. But it's not the only one. And definitely amongst the groups that I was studying, there were ones that I'd happily recommend to other women, definitely. Yeah.
You talked a bit about, I'm going to use this word, I'm not sure that you did, but around values and a concept of fit between the individual and the group.
Yeah.
And Drew's sort of given a question as to, you know, there are a lot of groups available now, increasingly so. And so with the different approaches that you saw, how do you think we could ensure or help people discover the right group for them, I guess?
I think you need to be looking at, firstly, what's their overall approach to it. So what do they think about with causing their drinking and so forth? Are they interested in AA, or are they frightened of AA? And that, of course, is a discussion in itself of, like, you know, it might actually be good for you or it might not. But if somebody's very opposed to that, so finding out that high level approach that they've got, if they've got some thoughts about it. But I think matching on terms of beliefs, as I said, I think isn't essential, other than the general approach. I don't think you need to worry that just because you're doing the Sinclair method, let's say, you have to go to the Sinclair method website. I think you need to look at what's the priority for the person in terms of what they want to get from the group, and what you think also, of course, you know, that you'd like them to get from it, if you know them well enough to do that. And that's going to be things like, what's the atmosphere in the group like? What are the relationships between people like? For example, one of my groups was incredibly warm and supportive. And yes, I think it was female dominated, not exclusively so, but it was. And it had a real culture of supporting each other. It didn't, where arguments happened, they didn't like it. And there was a lot of how this makes me feel when we argue, you know, and a lot of making up at the end of it. And it was just a really nice place to be, a very gentle, friendly, supportive one. And yes, they did challenge each other, and they did it in nice ways. Another of the groups was the polar opposite in some ways, in that it was very forthright, very robust, a lot of swearing, a lot of telling people off, you know. And I hate to say it, but it did seem to be male dominated, but I think that's cliche. I think it would have been like that, whoever was in it. But yeah, so that's going to be really important. I mean, if somebody who's feeling very vulnerable and insecure, frightened, went into the second of the groups that I mentioned, I think they could be put off for good, you know, certain parts of it. Other parts were better, but yeah.
Yeah, I think also,
so that's just one example, because there may be other things as well that you need to consider. But I do think that's a very important one, because what's going to happen is the relationships are going to become so important. And if you're with a group that feels domineering or dogmatic, or they're very harsh if you step out of line, and you're not going to respond well to that, that's not what you want, then it's not going to work, really, I don't think. However, it might be what you want, and actually you do want that, you know, accountability, as it were. So yeah, I'd say look at the culture of the group, and also, as I say, look at whether they're interested in 12-step or not 12-step. That seems to be a big one.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to sometimes gauge demographics of a group based on who is most active, and that's not necessarily representative of who the membership is, but there will always be a certain number of people who are more active, and then you've got the lurkers, like you say, and both fulfill, you know, roles, and we need everybody in that group, but yeah, sometimes certain people are more vocal than others. You talked a bit there about sort of this concept of seeing what the community is like, and I think perhaps you could talk a bit more about people's sort of journey into the group, because I'm conscious that we don't just utilize one group. From personal experience, you know, I've used a few groups and been part of them, less active sometimes, more. And how do you feel, you know, what was that fluidity of the journey like? Did people sort of say that they tried a couple and then come out and gone and found this one? You know, how did that work?
Absolutely, yes, it was very fluid. And I mean, not all of them. It was very variable. Everybody's journey was different, but quite a lot had tried other groups before, sampled them, maybe for quite a long time. Some had come to the group, gone away for a year or so, and then come back to it, and were picking it up again. So there's fluidity in that. Some were, yeah. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. I think, yeah, it's just important
yes,
to highlight that people can test them out. They can be part of something for a while before they fully engage, or like being a lurker, checking out the scene before you start commenting or posting.
That's it. And that's what I would love to see people telling others, that, that you don't have to. It's not like going to a face-to-face group where you walk in and you're going to be seen even if you don't say anything. You are kind of beginning to be known, which can be great. There's nothing wrong with that, but you are in that situation. If you really want to just check it out in advance, you can stay very private with online groups, and I think that's one of their strengths. And of course, most people who use them are lurkers or readers. So yeah, I also found that there were people who'd been in treatment, who'd been through different types of treatment and came to groups. And there was actually one person who I traced had moved through the two of the groups that I was studying, that he actually moved between those two, even though I didn't know it at the time I interviewed him. I've found out since. So, for him, his journey took him somewhere else. And it took him to AA in the middle of those two groups. So it's a very fluid thing. I think fluidity is a big characteristic of groups. And
I also think, you were focusing just on non-12-step groups, but it is also prevalent, I guess, that people use them in combination with 12-step groups as well. So there's no right or wrong way to be active within these groups or utilize the tools that they give.
That's right. Yeah, I did have interviewees who were also using other groups at the same time, and in one case, more than one case, 3 cases, that was AA as well. So, but they were using them for different things. I think they more identified with the ideas of the non-12 step, and they're going to AA for the supportive meetings and the hugs. So, but it's all about berry picking, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there is also that advantage with in-person meetings, irrespective of what foundation they're built upon, is that you get that personal connection and, personal touch to a certain extent, in person, face-to-face, or pre-COVID anyway, which I think still draws a lot of people in to build sort of an in real life community.
Absolutely.
I'm conscious of time. I just had sort of another question about how people utilize the community, because you talked about sort of information and so on, and there have been papers published, perhaps more focused on soberistas, around how people are utilizing that space, and information was very low on the list compared to community. So when you were talking to your participants, were they sort of interested in the information or the services provided by this group? Were they more interested in the community that they provided?
Both, I'd say. Yeah, both.
Okay.
I mean, my particular focus was information. I was based in an information school, so I was doing an information PhD. So I focused on that, and I wouldn't like in any way to suggest that that's the most important function of these groups for people, because support and social connection is just so huge. It's massive. But yeah, they were interested in both.
And on that note, my cat is now trying to get into the room. So before we have a cat bomb episode, we should probably wrap it up here. But thank you so much for sharing your research. That was really, topical for the Club Soda people who've watched live, but also then can watch again on demand. Ashtra, I think, reached out for your email address in the chat, so that's been provided to her. So you're well on your way with your future postdoc research, and hope to hear about your viva soon. So good luck with that, Sally.
I look forward to hearing from her, and thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.